My name is Reginald, and at 32, I never imagined waking up in a hospital to discover I was legally dead. The nurse screamed when she saw me conscious, dropping her clipboard with a clatter. Through my concussion fog, I heard hospital staff urgently discussing how my death certificate had already been processed. Someone had identified my body, claimed my belongings, and started collecting my insurance money. That someone was my parents. Our relationship had always been strained, but this betrayal was unfathomable. Before I tell you how I confronted them at my own funeral, let me know where you're watching from and subscribe for more stories about family betrayal and justice. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in suburban Massachusetts, where my parents Harold and Miriam Reynolds projected the image of typical American success. Our colonial-style house with its pristine lawn and two-car garage looked perfect from the outside. But behind closed doors, money was always the central focus of our family life, far more important than my well-being or happiness. My earliest memories involve my parents calculating costs and complaining about expenses. When I was 7, I needed braces, and I still remember my mother sighing as she told the orthodontist they would need a payment plan. "This is why we can never get ahead," she muttered to my father in the car ride home, as if I was not sitting right behind them. I learned to feel like a financial burden before I even understood what finances were. My 8th birthday party was canceled because my father needed to make an investment. Years later, I discovered this investment was actually paying off gambling debts. Dad had a serious problem, one carefully hidden from our extended family and neighbors. He would disappear for entire weekends, returning either elated with temporary winnings or, more often, sullen and angry about his losses. Mom enabled his addiction while simultaneously resenting it. Her priority was maintaining appearances. She bought designer clothes at outlet prices and learned to stretch groceries for days. We lived in a nice neighborhood because property values were important to her, but our refrigerator was often nearly empty. I wore hand-me-downs while she had a closet full of discount luxury brands. The contradiction was mind-boggling to me even as a child. School became my refuge. I was naturally good at math and science, subjects with clear rules and logical outcomes, unlike the unpredictable emotional landscape of home. My teachers encouraged me, providing the validation my parents never did. When I brought home straight A's, my father would briefly look up from his newspaper and say, "Good. Scholarships will save us money." I remember the Christmas when I was 12 and asked for a computer. Most of my friends were getting basic home computers, and I was fascinated by programming. Instead of considering it, my father laughed. "Do you think money grows on trees? Focus on things that will get you a scholarship." That night, I heard them arguing about money my dad had lost at a casino in Connecticut. $300 that could have been a basic computer for their only child had disappeared at a blackjack table. When I turned 16, most parents in our neighborhood helped their kids get a starter car. My parents informed me that if I wanted a car, I would need to buy it myself. I took a job at the local grocery store, working evenings and weekends throughout high school, to save enough for a 15-year-old Honda with rust spots and a temperamental transmission. My father's only contribution was criticism about my poor negotiation skills when purchasing it. Despite these challenges, or perhaps because of them, I excelled academically. I graduated as valedictorian and earned a full scholarship to MIT for computer science. The day I received my acceptance letter, my mother actually hugged me, though her words were telling, "Thank God we won't have to pay for college." There was no congratulations dinner, no celebration of my achievement, just relief about the money they wouldn't have to spend. I moved out the day after high school graduation, taking my few possessions to a summer sublet near campus. The freedom was intoxicating. For the first time, I could buy groceries I wanted, keep my space how I liked it, and not walk on eggshells around my father's volatile moods or my mother's cutting remarks. College was transformative. I made real friends who valued me for who I was, not what I could provide or save them. I studied hard, building the foundation for my future career. Contact with my parents dwindled to obligatory holiday phone calls and occasional visits that always left me feeling drained and diminished. After graduation, I landed a position at a promising tech startup in Boston. Over the next decade, I worked my way up, eventually becoming a senior software engineer with a comfortable six-figure salary. I bought a nice condo in Cambridge, invested wisely, and built the stable life my parents had pretended to have. 3 years ago, at 29, I made what would prove to be a nearly fatal mistake. During one of our infrequent phone conversations, my mother mentioned how responsible adults have proper insurance. It was one of her typical passive-aggressive comments, but it struck a chord. I was successful now, and part of me still wanted their approval, their acknowledgement that I had become someone worthy of respect. So I purchased a substantial life insurance policy worth $300,000. In a moment of filial obligation, I deeply regret, I named my parents as the beneficiaries. My thinking was painfully naive. This would give them security if anything happened to me, and perhaps finally prove I was responsible and successful in their eyes. The irony of this decision still haunts me. The accident happened on a Tuesday in November, just over 2 months ago. It had been an ordinary day at work, coding a new feature for our company's main product. I stayed late to finish a difficult section, leaving the office around 8:30. A heavy rain had started, turning the roads slick and visibility poor. I remember the details with unsettling clarity. The yellow glow of streetlights reflecting off wet pavement. The rhythmic swish of wipers fighting a losing battle against the downpour. I was driving carefully, aware of the dangerous conditions, but it wasn't enough. About 10 miles from my condo, on a curve of Route 2, my car hydroplaned. One moment I was in control, the next I was spinning across lanes. I remember the terrifying sensation of complete helplessness as my car slid toward the guardrail. The impact was deafening, metal crumpling against metal. The airbag deployed with explosive force, and pain shot through my chest and head. Then nothing. Darkness swallowed me whole, and I thought with strange detachment, this is what dying feels like. But it wasn't. It was just the beginning of a nightmare far more complex and painful than any car crash. I regained consciousness slowly, awareness returning in confusing fragments. First came the pain, throbbing in my head and ribs, a sharp sting in my left arm. Then sounds filtered in, beeping machines and muffled voices. I forced my swollen eyes open to see harsh fluorescent lights and a hospital ceiling. My mouth was desert dry, and when I tried to move, every part of my body protested. A young nurse entered the room, focused on a chart. When she looked up and saw me watching her, she dropped the clipboard. It hit the linoleum floor with a crack that made my head pound harder. She backed away, her face draining of color, as if seeing a ghost. "You're awake," she whispered, then louder. "You're awake." She backed into the hallway, calling for a doctor. I tried to speak, but could only manage a hoarse croak. A water pitcher sat on the bedside table, but I couldn't coordinate my movements enough to reach it. I felt disoriented, the way you might after sleeping for far too long, unable to place what day it was or how much time had passed. The room quickly filled with medical personnel, all staring at me with the same shocked expression. A gray-haired doctor approached cautiously, checking the monitors beside my bed. "Mr. Reynolds," he said, his voice betraying his disbelief. "Can you hear me?" I nodded slightly, wincing at the pain the movement caused. "Do you know where you are?" "Hospital," I managed to whisper. "Accident." While a nurse helped me sip water through a straw, I heard urgent whispers behind me. Phrases like death certificate, body already identified, and insurance claim initiated drifted through my concussion fog. Nothing made sense. I wondered if I was having some bizarre hallucination. When most of the staff had left, leaving only the doctor and original nurse, I found my voice again. "What's happening?" I asked. "Why is everyone looking at me like that?" The nurse exchanged an uncomfortable glance with the doctor before responding. "Mr. Reynolds, according to our records, you were pronounced dead at the scene of your accident. Your body was transported to the morgue. Your parents identified your remains yesterday morning." My brain refused to process these words. "That's impossible," I said. "I'm right here." "Yes," the doctor said cautiously. "That's the problem. Someone was identified as you, but clearly, he gestured to me. There's been a mistake." In the hours that followed, the full picture emerged through conversations with hospital administrators, doctors, and eventually a police detective. The night of my accident had seen multiple car crashes due to the treacherous weather. Another victim, similar to me in age and general appearance, had been found without identification. My wallet had been thrown from my vehicle on impact, and somehow in the chaos of emergency responses, identities had been confused. My injuries, though serious, had never been life-threatening. I had suffered a severe concussion, 3 broken ribs, a fractured wrist, and numerous cuts and bruises. I had been unconscious for nearly 36 hours, but stable the entire time. The hospital's enormous error in patient identification had been compounded by my parents' actions. They had quickly identified the other man's body as mine, claimed my personal effects, and immediately contacted my insurance company. The speed of their actions had prevented standard verification protocols. The hospital was now in complete damage control mode, terrified of the liability they faced. As the implications became clearer, I tried repeatedly to call my parents. Each time, the call went straight to voicemail. Were they avoiding me? Or simply too busy planning my funeral and spending my insurance money to answer? Detective Sarah Morgan arrived that afternoon, a serious woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She initially regarded me with skepticism, carefully comparing my face to my driver's license photo and asking detailed personal questions to confirm my identity. "I apologize for the thoroughness," she said after she was satisfied. "But this is an unusual situation. Your fingerprints and hospital admission records confirm who you are, which means we have a potential case of fraud on our hands." Fraud? The word felt inadequate. My own parents identified someone else's body as mine and started claiming my life insurance. That's not just fraud. That's... I trailed off, unable to find words terrible enough. Detective Morgan's expression softened slightly. "I understand this is extremely disturbing, Mr. Reynolds. Rest assured, we'll investigate thoroughly. I've already confirmed with the insurance company that your parents filed a claim yesterday afternoon. The policy amount is significant, $300,000. They've already tried to claim it?" The betrayal cut deeper with each new detail. Not just tried. The company expedited an initial payout of $50,000 due to their apparent distress and funeral expenses. She paused, watching my reaction. "They've also arranged for a funeral service tomorrow afternoon at Riverside Memorial Chapel." I felt physically ill. My own funeral, planned by parents who knew I wasn't dead, who were counting on me never waking up or being properly identified. Had they hoped the other man's body would be cremated before anyone discovered the truth? How could the people who raised me do something so monstrous? Detective Morgan pulled a chair close to my bed. "Mr. Reynolds, I need to ask a difficult question. Do you have any reason to believe your parents would intentionally misidentify you for financial gain?" Images flashed through my mind. A lifetime of memories suddenly recontextualized. The disappointment in my mother's eyes when I needed something that cost money. My father's casual cruelty, always framed around finances. Their distance over the years, the lack of genuine interest in my life, beyond what I could provide. "Yes," I finally answered, the single word containing a lifetime of painful realizations. "I have many reasons to believe they would do exactly that." Detective Morgan spent the next several hours interviewing me about my relationship with my parents and the details of my life insurance policy. Each question peeled back another layer of the deception, revealing the calculated nature of their scheme. The detective's professional demeanor occasionally slipped, showing flashes of genuine outrage on my behalf. "Your policy has a double indemnity clause for accidental death," she explained, reviewing documents on her tablet. "That means the payout doubles to $600,000. Your parents were well aware of this provision when they filed the claim." I stared at the ceiling, feeling oddly detached. The magnitude of their betrayal seemed to require more emotion than I could currently access. "We've obtained their banking records through an emergency subpoena," Detective Morgan continued. "There have been several large withdrawals and purchases in the last 24 hours. They bought 2 first-class plane tickets to the Bahamas departing the day after your funeral, made a down payment on a vacation property, and your father withdrew $10,000 in cash." "The funeral," I said, focusing on the most immediate issue. "What exactly are they planning?" "A closed casket service at Riverside Memorial. They told the funeral director that your body was too damaged from the accident to be viewable." She shook her head in disgust. They've invited approximately 50 people, colleagues of yours, some distant relatives, neighbors. The thought of my friends and coworkers genuinely mourning me while my parents performed grief made my stomach turn. People who actually cared about me were being manipulated as props in my parents' theatrical production. I want to be there, I said suddenly, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. I want to walk into that funeral and see their faces when they realize their plan failed. Detective Morgan studied me carefully. That could work to our advantage, legally speaking. If we surprise them in a public setting, they might say something incriminating. But are you sure you're physically up to it? You've sustained serious injuries. I pushed myself to sit up straighter, ignoring the pain in my ribs. I'll manage. I need to do this. All right, she nodded. But we'll need to be strategic. I suggest we don't confront them immediately. Let's gather more evidence first, including surveillance on their activities today and tomorrow morning. By that evening, I had been officially discharged from the hospital against medical advice. Detective Morgan arranged for me to stay in a hotel under a false name to prevent any chance encounter with my parents. 2 officers were assigned to watch their house while she helped me settle into the hotel room, providing me with some basic necessities, since all my personal items were either still in my damaged car or had been taken by my parents. The detective's investigation continued to uncover disturbing details. My parents had emptied my apartment, telling the building manager they were collecting my belongings following my tragic death. They had accessed my bank accounts using a power of attorney document I had foolishly signed years ago and never revoked. The depth of their preparation was staggering. Most shocking were the financial records Detective Morgan obtained through her investigation. My parents were in far worse financial shape than I had ever realized. My father's gambling addiction had escalated dramatically in recent years. They had second and third mortgages on their house, maxed out credit cards, and had borrowed money from predatory lenders. Foreclosure proceedings had already begun on their home. They were desperate, drowning in debt with no way out. Except for my death, I spent that night in the sterile hotel room, staring at the ceiling. The pain medication dulled the physical discomfort, but did nothing for the emotional trauma. I kept thinking about all the times I had sought their approval, their love. The holidays I had dutifully visited despite their emotional coldness. The checks I had sent when they hinted at financial difficulties. The insurance policy I had purchased partly to please them, to show I was responsible. All along, I had been nothing more than a potential payday to them. The realization hollowed me out, leaving nothing but echoing emptiness where familial love should have been. Morning came with new determination. Detective Morgan arrived early with coffee and a plan. "We'll conduct surveillance today," she explained. "I want to catch them saying or doing something explicitly incriminating before the funeral confrontation. The insurance fraud charges are solid, but anything we can add will strengthen the case." I insisted on being part of the surveillance despite her concerns about my condition. She reluctantly agreed, setting conditions that I remain in her unmarked police car and follow her instructions precisely. We parked down the street from a high-end shopping mall where her team had tracked my parents through their credit card usage. We didn't have to wait long. They emerged from a luxury clothing store, arms laden with bags. My mother wore a new dress that I could tell even from a distance was expensive. My father had a shopping bag from a high-end watch retailer. They were literally spending the money they had received for my death, while planning to collect hundreds of thousands more. Detective Morgan used a directional microphone to record their conversation as they walked to their car. Through the headphones she handed me, I heard my mother's voice clearly. "The black dress is perfect for the funeral. Appropriately somber but still flattering." My father laughed, the sound sending chills through me. "Make sure you cry convincingly. The insurance adjuster might be there." "Please," my mother scoffed. "I've been practicing in the mirror. Nobody will question a mother's grief." They loaded their purchases into the car, continuing their callous conversation. "I still can't believe how easy this was," my father said. "The hospital didn't even question our identification. And with the closed casket, nobody will know the difference." "Just think," my mother replied, her voice animated in a way I rarely heard. "In 48 hours, we'll be on a beach with no debt and $600,000 to enjoy. Detective Morgan placed a hand on my arm, silently checking if I was okay to continue listening. I nodded rigidly, needing to hear every word of their true feelings. "It's almost poetic," my father continued. "Reginald never did much for us when he was alive. Always so focused on his own success, barely helping his struggling parents." My jaw clenched at the blatant lie. How many times had I sent them money, offered to help them budget, suggested my father seek treatment for his gambling addiction? "His life's worth more dead than alive," my mother laughed, the sound brittle and cold. $600,000 more, to be exact. I felt physically ill, my ribs aching as my breathing quickened. Detective Morgan turned off the microphone, her expression grim. "We got it," she said quietly. "That's more than enough to prove intent." But there was more. As they were about to get into their car, my father made a statement that would haunt me forever. "We didn't need you," he said, as if speaking directly to me. "We needed the money, always did." I sat in stunned silence as Detective Morgan drove us away. The words echoed in my head, a terrible confirmation of what I had always feared but never fully accepted. To my parents, I had never been a son to love. I had only ever been a resource to exploit. With the damning evidence recorded, Detective Morgan accelerated our plans. She arranged a meeting with the district attorney's office where we played the surveillance audio and outlined the case. The prosecutor, a stern woman named Patricia Oakes, was visibly disturbed by what she heard. "This is one of the most cold-blooded fraud cases I've encountered," she said, making notes as she spoke. "We'll pursue maximum charges: insurance fraud, identity theft, grand larceny, falsifying documents, and abuse of a corpse for the misidentification. They're looking at significant prison time." While the legal machinery began moving, I remained in a state of emotional shock. The detective suggested I rest at the hotel, but staying alone with my thoughts seemed unbearable. Instead, I asked to continue the surveillance, needing to see the full extent of my parents' betrayal with my own eyes. We followed them to a luxury car dealership where they test drove a Mercedes convertible, to a real estate office where they reviewed vacation properties, and finally back to their home. The house where I grew up looked exactly the same from the outside, a perfect facade hiding the rot within, both literal and metaphorical. Detective Morgan parked where we could observe the front of the house. Using specialized audio equipment, her team had managed to place listening devices near enough to capture conversations through the open windows on this unseasonably warm January day. The funeral director called. My mother's voice came through clearly. "Everything's set for tomorrow at 2. He wanted to know if we wanted to include any personal items in the casket." My father laughed. "What would be the point? It's not like it's actually him in there." "I told him we were too distraught to think about such things," she replied. "I suggested they could add a few generic items, a book or something. I don't care." They discussed practical details about the funeral with the detached interest of people planning a dinner party, not a service for their supposedly deceased son. They debated which mourners might give them the most sympathy and financial support. They rehearsed what they would say in their eulogies. "Remember to mention how he was always so serious about his future," my mother instructed. "It makes the irony of his early death more poignant. And I'll talk about how proud we were of his success," my father added. "Makes us seem less likely to need his money." Their calculated performance was sickening to witness. These people had raised me, had shaped my early understanding of love and family. How had I never fully recognized the depth of their dysfunction? How much of my own emotional damage came from their toxic influence? As twilight settled over the neighborhood, I watched them through binoculars, sitting at the kitchen table counting cash. They were smiling, animated in a way I rarely saw growing up. My death had made them happier than my life ever had. "That's enough," Detective Morgan said gently, turning off the surveillance equipment. "We have everything we need for the case." Back at the hotel, she helped me finalize plans for the funeral confrontation. Additional plainclothes officers would be positioned throughout the service. The funeral home director had been discreetly informed of the situation and agreed to cooperate. Every detail was carefully choreographed for maximum legal impact. "You should try to rest now," she advised, concern evident in her voice. Tomorrow will be extremely difficult emotionally, but sleep was impossible. I sat at the hotel desk and began writing what I would say when I faced my parents. The words came in a torrent, years of unacknowledged pain finding expression. I wrote until dawn, revising and refining until I had distilled my lifetime of complex emotions into a statement that felt true. As morning broke, I looked at my reflection in the hotel mirror. The bruises on my face had begun to yellow around the edges. The cut on my forehead was healing beneath butterfly bandages. I looked very much alive, despite what my death certificate said. And tomorrow, I would confront the people who had wished me dead. Riverside Memorial Chapel was a stately brick building with stained glass windows and a sweeping circular driveway. Detective Morgan parked her unmarked car behind the building, where I could enter unobserved through a service door. My body ached as I carefully exited the vehicle, my fractured wrist in a cast, and my movement slowed by my injured ribs. The detective handed me a bottle of pain medication. "Take one now," she advised. "You'll need your wits about you, but you also need to manage the pain." Inside, the funeral director led us to a small office where we could monitor the arriving mourners through a security camera system. I watched in silence as people began to fill the chapel. Many faces I recognized from work, a few distant relatives, some neighbors, all genuinely believing they were there to honor my memory, all being cruelly deceived. My parents arrived last, making an entrance in somber but expensive new attire. My mother wore the black designer dress she had purchased yesterday, accented with pearl jewelry I had never seen before. My father sported a tailored suit and what appeared to be the new watch, its gold band catching the light as he shook hands with attendees. They moved through the crowd accepting condolences with practiced expressions of grief. "They're good," I whispered. I almost believed them myself. Detective Morgan's expression hardened. Sociopaths usually are convincing. The service began with soft organ music. At the front of the room sat a gleaming mahogany casket, closed as planned, containing the body of a stranger my parents had identified as me. The simple wrongness of it made me dizzy. Someone else's loved one was being mourned as me, while his own family likely wondered about his fate. The funeral director spoke briefly, then introduced my father for the first eulogy. I listened through the office speakers as he stood at the podium, his voice breaking at carefully calculated moments. "Our son Reginald was always exceptional," he began. "From childhood, he showed a determination and intelligence that made us incredibly proud. While our time with him was cut tragically short, the success he achieved in his brief life was remarkable. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. This man had never once told me he was proud of me when I was supposedly alive. Now that he believed me dead, he spoke of pride and love with an ease that sent rage coursing through me. Reginald was a devoted son," he continued, the lie so blatant I nearly laughed despite the pain it caused my ribs. "He understood the importance of family, and while we are devastated by his loss, we take comfort in knowing he lived his life with purpose and meaning." Detective Morgan checked her watch and nodded to me. It was time. She spoke quietly into her radio, alerting the other officers positioned throughout the chapel. Then she helped me to my feet. "Are you ready?" she asked. I took a deep breath, feeling the painful restriction of my broken ribs. I've been ready for this my entire life. I just didn't know it until now. We made our way through the back corridor of the funeral home. I could hear my father continuing his performance, his voice rising with fake emotion as he described the son he had never bothered to truly know. Though taken from us far too soon in this tragic accident, Reginald's spirit and legacy will live on in our hearts, he was saying as we reached the chapel doors. His generosity and success will continue to support his family, just as he would have wanted. Detective Morgan pushed the doors open, and I walked in. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Someone screamed. Another person knocked over a flower arrangement in shock, but I barely registered any of it. My focus was entirely on my parents. My father froze mid-sentence, his mouth hanging open. The color drained from his face so rapidly I thought he might faint. My mother, seated in the front row, turned to see what had caused the disruption. When her eyes landed on me, she clutched her new pearl necklace as if it might protect her. Neither of them moved or spoke. They simply stared in abject horror at the son they had declared dead for financial gain. I walked slowly down the center aisle, painfully aware of every eye on me, every whispered exclamation. Detective Morgan followed a few steps behind, her badge visible on her belt. When I reached the front of the chapel, I turned to face the gathering, standing beside the casket that supposedly contained my remains. "As you can see," I said, my voice stronger than I expected, "reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated." The silence that followed was absolute. I unfolded the paper where I had written my statement and began to read. 2 months ago, I was in a car accident during a rainstorm. I was injured but very much alive, unconscious in a hospital, while my parents identified another man's body as mine. They did this knowingly and deliberately to collect my life insurance policy worth $300,000, with a double indemnity clause, bringing the total to $600,000. Murmurs of shock and disbelief spread through the room. My mother made a small, strangled sound. My father seemed frozen in place at the podium. Yesterday, I heard my mother laugh about how my life was worth more dead than alive. I heard my father say they never needed me, only my money. They have already spent the initial insurance payment on luxury items while planning to leave the country after collecting the full amount. I gestured to Detective Morgan, who stepped forward. "This is Detective Sarah Morgan of the Boston Police Department. My parents are being charged with fraud, identity theft, grand larceny, and additional crime. The man in this casket deserves to be properly identified and returned to his actual family, who are undoubtedly searching for him." My father finally found his voice. "Reggie," he stammered, "this is a misunderstanding. We thought you were dead. The hospital told us you were gone." "Save it for court," I replied coldly. "We have audio recordings of your conversations planning this fraud. Your own words will convict you." My mother stood shakily. "You don't understand how desperate we were," she cried, tears suddenly appearing, though her makeup remained perfect. "The debts, the threats from lenders. We needed help. I offered help many times," I said, addressing her directly. "You refused it because it came with conditions like addiction treatment for Dad and financial counseling for both of you. You didn't want help. You wanted a windfall with no strings attached." Detective Morgan nodded to the plainclothes officers scattered throughout the room. They converged on my parents, handcuffs ready. "Harold and Miriam Reynolds," Detective Morgan announced formally, "you are under arrest for insurance fraud, identity theft, grand larceny, falsifying documents, and abuse of a corpse. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As the officers led them away, my father looked back at me with an expression of pure hatred, as if I had somehow wronged him by surviving. My mother kept her eyes down, already calculating her next performance for the judge and jury. The chapel erupted into confused conversations as the reality of the situation sank in. Friends approached me cautiously, as if I might be a ghost. Colleagues expressed outrage on my behalf. The funeral director apologized profusely for his unwitting role in the deception. I stood amid the chaos, feeling oddly calm. The confrontation I had dreaded was over. My parents' true nature was finally exposed, not just to me, but to everyone. There was a strange relief in that public confirmation that I wasn't crazy, that I hadn't imagined or exaggerated their emotional abuse and exploitation over the years. As Detective Morgan had predicted, they had convicted themselves with their own words and actions. Their performance of grief had collapsed instantly when faced with the living son they had tried to erase. And now they would face consequences far beyond anything they had anticipated when they hatched their scheme. "Are you all right?" Detective Morgan asked quietly, as the chapel gradually emptied. I considered the question carefully before answering. "No," I said honestly, "but I think someday I might be." News of my resurrection and my parents' arrest spread quickly. Local media picked up the story first, then national outlets. By evening, my phone was ringing constantly with interview requests and messages from stunned friends who hadn't attended the funeral. I turned it off, retreating to the quiet of my hotel room, while Detective Morgan handled the press with minimal details. The legal process began immediately. My parents were booked at the local precinct, their mugshots showing them still in their funeral attire, expressions stunned and angry. They were denied bail due to the flight risk evidenced by their purchased plane tickets and the severity of the charges. The district attorney pursued the case aggressively, calling it one of the most callous examples of familial betrayal she had ever prosecuted. In the days that followed, I had to rebuild my legal existence. The death certificate had to be voided. My bank accounts needed to be unfrozen. My apartment had been emptied, requiring me to find temporary housing and replace essentials. The bureaucratic nightmare of coming back from the dead was almost as traumatic as the betrayal itself. My parents attempted to contact me multiple times through their court-appointed attorneys. They sent letters full of excuses and rationalizations. They had been desperate. They weren't thinking clearly. They had planned to confess after paying off their debts. Each message was more self-serving than the last, focused entirely on their suffering rather than what they had done to me. I refused all contact, communicating only through my own attorney. The evidence against them was overwhelming, bolstered by their recorded conversations and the paper trail of their spending spree. Still, they insisted on taking the case to trial, apparently believing they could somehow manipulate a jury as they had manipulated everyone else in their lives. The trial began 3 months after my funeral. By then, my physical injuries had mostly healed, though I still experienced occasional pain in my ribs. The emotional wounds remained raw and gaping. I had started therapy, trying to understand how I could have remained so blind to their true nature for so long, how I could have continued seeking approval from people incapable of genuine love. The courthouse was packed with media and spectators. I testified on the second day, recounting our relationship and the events following my accident in careful, measured tones. I described waking in the hospital to find myself legally dead. I played the recordings of my parents discussing how my life was worth more dead than alive. My father glared at me throughout my testimony. My mother kept her eyes downcast, occasionally dabbing at non-existent tears with a tissue, playing the role of the misunderstood, desperate mother. Their defense was pathetic, claiming they had genuinely believed I was dead initially, and then panicked when they realized their mistake. The recordings of their shopping spree and vacation plans thoroughly contradicted this narrative. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning with guilty verdicts on all counts. The judge, clearly disgusted by the details of the case, sentenced them to 15 years each, with no possibility of parole for at least 10. As they were led from the courtroom, neither looked back at me. They had finally stopped pretending I mattered to them at all. The aftermath of the trial brought unexpected challenges. I had achieved justice, but found myself adrift. My professional life had been disrupted, my personal belongings scattered, my sense of security shattered. Well-meaning friends offered support but couldn't truly understand the depth of the betrayal I had experienced. Public attention created its own problems. People recognized me from news stories, sometimes approaching with inappropriate questions or unwanted sympathy. I became that guy whose parents faked his death rather than just Reginald, the software engineer with a quiet life. There were unexpected bright spots, however. Colleagues rallied around me, helping me secure a new position after my extended absence from work. Friends I hadn't been particularly close to stepped up with surprising generosity, offering furniture, household items, and genuine emotional support. Most surprising was the connection I formed with the family of Thomas Geller, the man who had been misidentified as me. When his actual identity was discovered, his family had been overjoyed to finally have answers after weeks of desperate searching. We met during the process of sorting out the legal tangle and found unexpected comfort in sharing our bizarre, interconnected trauma. Thomas had been 34, a teacher with no identification on him when he crashed his motorcycle the same night as my accident. His family invited me to his real funeral, a celebration of his life that stood in stark contrast to the cold, calculated service my parents had arranged. Seeing a family grieve with genuine love highlighted everything that had been missing in my own family dynamic. "You're always welcome with us for holidays," Thomas's mother told me, holding my hand tightly after the service. "We're connected now, in a strange way." Her simple kindness broke something open inside me. I cried for the first time since the whole ordeal began, mourning not just the parents I never truly had, but the relationship I had spent a lifetime pretending existed. The rebuilding process was slow and often painful. My therapist helped me recognize patterns established in childhood, the ways I had learned to seek validation from people incapable of giving it, my tendency to measure my worth in terms of what I could provide rather than who I was. You survived not just the accident, but decades of subtle emotional abuse, Dr. Winters told me during one particularly difficult session. Your parents commodified you from childhood. It's no wonder you struggle to see your intrinsic value. 6 months after the trial, I made the decision to visit my parents in prison. It wasn't for reconciliation, but for my own closure. I needed to face them one final time, now that I could see them clearly. The prison visiting room was stark and impersonal. My father arrived first, older looking than at the trial, the privileged arrogance diminished by the reality of incarceration. He sat across from me, separated by a transparent barrier, his expression guarded. "You're looking well," he said, as if we were meeting for a normal family dinner. "I didn't come for small talk," I replied evenly. "I came to understand if you ever saw me as anything more than a financial resource." His facade cracked slightly. "That's not fair. We raised you, put a roof over your head, fed you. The bare minimum required by law isn't parenting," I said. "Did you ever love me at all?" He looked away, unable or unwilling to answer directly. "You don't understand what it's like to struggle financially your whole life. The constant pressure, the humiliation. I offered to help you many times. You refused because you didn't want to change." He leaned forward, sudden anger flashing. "We deserved that money. After everything we did for you, we deserved something back." In that moment, I saw him with complete clarity. There would never be remorse or understanding. In his mind, I had wronged him by surviving and exposing their scheme, not the other way around. I stood up before my allotted time was finished. "Goodbye, Dad. I won't be back." My mother was different, her approach more calculated. She had lost weight and applied what little makeup was permitted to create an appearance of suffering. When she saw me, tears immediately appeared. "My boy," she whispered, "I've prayed every day for your forgiveness." "Have you prayed for actual remorse?" I asked. "Because those are different things." Her expression flickered before settling back into practiced contrition. "We were desperate. You can't imagine what that does to a person's judgment. If you were a parent, you would understand." "If I were a parent," I replied calmly, "I would love my child for who they are, not what they could provide me. I would never see them as a cash value." She reached toward the barrier between us. "We can heal from this. Family is forever." "Family should be about love," I said, standing up. "What we had was a transaction that failed. That's why you're here, and why I'm moving on with my life." As I walked away, she called after me, her tone changing from pleading to bitter. "You always were selfish. After everything we sacrificed." I didn't look back. Whatever remaining illusions I had about our relationship dissolved in that moment. The visit provided the closure I needed, confirming that continuing any relationship would only perpetuate damage to my own well-being. In the 2 years since then, I've built a new life. I sold my condo in Cambridge and moved to Seattle for a fresh start and a new position with a tech company. I've developed genuine friendships based on mutual respect rather than obligation or utility. I've even started dating again, slowly learning to trust and be vulnerable. The experience transformed me in ways I'm still discovering. I've become an advocate for fraud victims, particularly those betrayed by family members. I volunteer with a support group for adult survivors of emotional abuse. Sharing my story has helped others recognize and escape toxic family dynamics similar to what I experienced. I've learned that family isn't defined by blood, but by love and respect. The chosen family I've built around me has provided more genuine connection than my biological parents ever did. Thomas Geller's family still invites me for major holidays, and I've found unexpected joy in those gatherings. Most importantly, I've learned that my value isn't tied to what I can provide others. I matter simply because I exist, not because of my income, success, or what I can give. This simple truth took 34 years and a near-death experience to fully understand. The scars remain, both physical and emotional. I still startle at unexpected hospital sounds. I'm still working through trust issues in relationships, but these wounds no longer define me. They're simply part of my story, evidence of survival, rather than victimhood. If you're watching this and recognize patterns of commodification in your own relationships, please know that you deserve better. Your worth isn't measured in financial terms or what you can provide others. True love never comes with a price tag or calculation of return on investment. Have you ever discovered someone in your life valued you only for what you could provide them? How did you handle that realization? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories of betrayal, survival, and ultimate triumph. Thank you for listening to my journey from legally dead to truly alive for the first time.